Well, last week, as part of the madness, the cancel culture, Nigel Farage has a show on the LBC. He's had it for years. It's 1 hour, 4 nights a week. Great show, talking, all that stuff. He made the comment in an argument on his show that the Taliban were that Black Lives Matter were very similar to the Taliban in that both groups tore down statues to eradicate the past. He said he compared Taliban with Black Lives Matter. That was it. He's now out of a job. Lost it. Gone. Nigel Farage joins us now. Spoke to Rita, James and I. Cancel culture barbarians are at the gate. The iconoclasts are tearing down the statues, dragging reputations through the mud. Our city's in flames, rioters, looters, chaos. Nigel Farage, is this the fall of the West?
It doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be, because the truth of it is, you know, as you say, we're seeing statues being torn down, we're seeing thuggery, we're seeing anarchy on a scale I've never seen in my lifetime. But here's the truth of it. We in Bristol saw a statue torn down last Sunday. A mob tore down a statue, stamped on it, screamed hysterically, and threw it into the seaside dock. All right? Now, to watch mainstream media, you would think that the country is in full support of this action because the individual was involved in the slave trade. And yet, when YouGov poll 4,300 people in the United Kingdom and asked them about this, only 13% supported the removal of the statue in that way. All right? So I don't think I've ever seen a bigger gap between what mainstream media is portraying, what mainstream politicians dare not say, and how the public is feeling. So no, it's not the fall of the West. But it may well be the fall of our current political class if they haven't got the courage and the moral courage to stand up and do what is right. This is not about the death of George Floyd, horrible though that may have been. This is about an organisation called Black Lives Matter, funded with hundreds of millions of dollars, funded, it's all the usual suspects, it's the George Soroses and everybody else. And this is about bringing down everything we know and understand within our civilizations, destroying all of our heroes, all of our icons, all of our background, all of our history. And I tell you what, if the church can't resist it, if our politicians can't resist it, then something will come in its place that will.
Nigel, you've had your own dreadful week. You quite rightly and correctly compared the actions of Black Lives Matter, tearing down statues, etc., to the Taliban, who famously tore down the statues as well. For that, you appear to have lost your job. Tell us why, and jeered at and cheered at by your colleagues for having done so. Explain, please.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a pretty, you know, almost universal thing across mainstream media in London is to support people taking matters into their own hands and making these gestures against the evils of slavery. I said, look, you know, if the mob decide that they can tear things down, and don't forget, it wasn't just the statue of a slave trader. We also had the cenotaph, you know, which represents the dead killed, not just from England and the United Kingdom, but from Australia and Canada and India and all of those countries that stood by us in 2 world wars. The cenotaph was desecrated. Winston Churchill's statue on 2 consecutive days was vandalized in the most appalling way. Graffiti written across it, Churchill is a racist. The mob out of control. And, you know, along with the church and our government not having the moral courage to stand up and stop this, the police stood there and watched these things going on. And to my knowledge, there's not yet been a single arrest of anybody that desecrated Churchill's statue or our national monument to the 1.5 million killed from the UK and the Commonwealth countries. So I refuse, I point blank refuse to bow down before the mob. Now, if you want to change your interpretation of history by altering statues in city centres or whatever it may be, you can do that. but you must do that through your democratically elected local governments, through your local mayors, not allow the mob to do it. And I refused to stand down, before it. And yes, I did say that I thought they behaved like the Taliban. Now, some people don't like that comparison, but I think it's an actually very accurate one. You know, the Taliban in Syria, destroying monuments going back to the 6th and 7th centuries because they don't like history. They want to rewrite it. So I'm not going to go into the details of what happened at LBC. I'm not a great believer in washing dirty linen in public. But, I've got to move on. But I won't be the last casualty of what is going on here, because the deeply cynical way that these people operate, and we're seeing it now with Tucker Carlson, with Fox News and the USA, is what they do is they bombard the companies that advertise, and try and put the wind up them. And I have to say, to date, people like Rupert Murdoch have had the courage to stand up and say, no, this is ridiculous. Ultimately, you're advertising through us because of the demographic of those that watch us and listen to us. So, look, no details from me, Rowan, as to what exactly went on, but you can probably deduce that I'm less than pleased.
Absolutely. Rita?
I'm interested in your take on the current furor. You've had now right-wing protesters showing up and violence breaking out, and the media treatment of that violence has been very different. Just take us through that, please.
Yeah, I mean, look, let me say, before I move on to the question, Rita, that I am not a supporter of the English Defence League. I am not a supporter of a large group of shaven-headed, youngish men with tattoos up the backs of their necks who go in for direct action. However, the intentions, I believe, of most of the EDL, the English Defence League, who were in London today, they were there ostensibly to protect the statues from being vandalised. And what was really interesting was the way they were policed was entirely different to this time last week. Rather than the police just standing there and let protesters do whatever they like, here we saw the police in full riot gear, roads closed, protesters kettled, kept into a confined area. And there was some violence, there were some standoffs, there were some punch-ups between these guys and between the police, which I condemn. But what's interesting is the political reaction to it. Sadiq Khan, who this time last week was telling us about largely peaceful protests, so peaceful that 62 police officers finished up in hospital. That was his analysis last week. This week, he says this is appalling racist violence in London. And of course, our Prime Minister, who has barely been seen for a week that this anarchy has been going on. He just puts out the odd tweet, and our Prime Minister decries racists on the streets of London. I would suggest they were more nationalists than they were racists. But given the complete lack of moral authority in dealing with the yobbery and the violence of last week, I did actually predict last Sunday that this would happen. I did predict that unless the government got a grip of this, people would start to take it into their own hands. They are. So look, without supporting the behaviour of many of those in London today, it's very interesting to see the media and political reaction, which is completely different to this time last week.
Yeah, well, the left, the Marxists, would like you to believe that nationalists are racist. James?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because just in the last couple of hours, we've seen Boris Johnson tweet that, racist thuggery has no place in our streets, and he's completely correct about that. But his earlier tweets about what was going on when even the statue of his great idol, Winston Churchill, were being defaced were far more equivocatory and, well, people are upset about stuff and things kind of along that line. Are you disappointed with Boris Johnson, and are you regretting the fact that you stood down your UKIP candidates in the election, your Brexit candidates in the election, to prevent there being three-cornered contests there? What's your take on how Boris Johnson is handling or not handling this?
Well, look, Boris Johnson wouldn't be Prime Minister if I hadn't done what I'd done. The Conservatives this time last year were led by Theresa May. She was hopeless. She was betraying Brexit. You know, I launched the Brexit Party out of UKIP. We won the European elections. We toppled Mrs May. And Boris Johnson, who many thought wouldn't even make the shortlist of two who'd become the next Tory leader, becomes Prime Minister. When the general election came around, you know, I was in a very difficult position because Boris was beginning to sing the same song that I've been putting out there and repeating over and over and over. And I felt that if the impact of my standing would make the chances of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister, or the chances of us being forced into a second referendum even greater, that it would be self-defeating. So no, at that moment in time, it was the right thing to give Boris a free pass and to help to make sure that he did win the election and win it comfortably. However, there is a very big difference in being somebody who can be effervescent, can be optimistic, can be humorous, can be entertaining, and Boris can do all of those things very, very well. Then there is something called leadership. And with leadership, you have to stand up, be brave, and make tough calls. And at the moment in time, I have to say, he's looking like one of the weakest leaders we have ever seen, and somebody who, frankly, doesn't even fit the category of conservative. It is under his watch over these last couple of weeks that we have seen mob rule on the streets of London, leading to the equal and opposite response from the EDL today. And unless he's able, and look, I know he was very, very ill with COVID-19. I know that. I know dealing with coronavirus has not been easy, you know, because it was an unknown thing that faced us. I know he's had all sorts of problems this year, you know, a divorce, a new baby, all these sort of things. But, you know, unless he gets a grip pretty quickly, he is going to become a prime minister without any authority whatsoever.